Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. Curling Canada announces that Lethbridge has landed a major sporting event for 2022. Even though the UCP announced that restrictions will remain in place until January 21st, some business owners say they may fully reopen on Monday. And we hear from the Alberta director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, who says Albertans could be seeing a tax increase at the worst possible time.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. Curling fans in southern Alberta, rejoice. Lethbridge has been selected by Curling Canada to host the 2022 Tim Hortons Brier. Major curling championships have been held in our city before, but never a Brier. As Ainsley O'Reilly explains now, Lethbridge is only one of a handful of Canadian cities to host all four major curling events.
We're so excited. We can't wait till March of 2022. And thank you to everybody who's been part of this. It's going to be a tremendous success.
The tournament will be held from March 4th through 13th of next year at the Unmasking Center. Back in June, Lethbridge placed their bid, and Curling Canada says it was competitive.
And I could tell you that the competition to host the 2022 Tim Hortons Brier was fierce.
We've invested in curling in our city, and we've had a great history of curlers leaving our city, and we think the future is even brighter.
The city is looking forward to dollars coming in from potential tourism, as well as bringing a bright light to Lethbridge post-COVID-19.
And future hope in 2022 is really a huge boost, not just to our economy, but to our people in general.
Aside from hosting one of Canada's most treasured sports, local curling clubs are looking forward to bringing the community together.
We do hope that we expand this excitement for this to become a 360-degree celebration that includes everybody in Lethbridge and the region.
Lethbridge will become just the fourth city in the country to host all four major Seasons of Champions events: the Tim Hortons Brier, the Scotties Tournament of Hearts, and both men's and women's World Curling Championships. The other cities were Winnipeg, Brandon, and St. John. For Bridge City News, I'm Ainsley O'Reilly.
There was some sad news from Curling Alberta today. Due to COVID-19 pandemic restrictions, the group announced the cancellation of its three flagship provincial championships, which were planned for Sylvan Lake next month. The Boston Pizza Cup, the Sentinel Storage Alberta Scotties Tournament of Hearts, and the Alberta Mixed Doubles Provincial Championship have all officially been cancelled. Curling Alberta, however, will still be represented at the National Championships in the hub city of Calgary next month. Alberta will not loosen its current COVID-19 restrictions until January 21st at the earliest. Premier Jason Kenney says with rising COVID-19 cases, our province has to stay the course to help flatten the curve. Many Lethbridge business owners who are struggling are frustrated, and some say they may open their doors regardless fully on Monday.
While measures do need to be in place to stop the spread of COVID-19, and I support some of those measures, we need to take a more holistic approach to public health. Public health isn't just wearing a mask and standing 6 feet apart. Public health is focusing on nutritional protocols and focusing on weight loss, because we know that being overweight and obese is one of the primary risk factors from COVID-19.
The government has clearly said that gyms and hair salons are not spreaders of the virus. Their stats show that. They're the ones doing the contact tracing. They're the ones compiling the numbers. They're saying we weren't the spreaders, and we thank you for doing such a good job, but we're going to shut you down anyways. So they shut us down. And then they go, okay, we'll give you three weeks. Well, 3 weeks is coming, and then, we're going to make it 4 weeks now because the numbers haven't changed. It's still not safe. We're locking the kids out of school. It's not safe for them, although no kids have ever died from COVID. And now all of a sudden we're coming up to the 4-week mark, and they're like, we're going to keep gyms closed, but we're going to let the kids go back to school for their mental health. The numbers haven't changed, so why are kids allowed to go back to school if it's still so dangerous? We weren't open. So how are we the problem? We weren't the problem to start with, and we're still not the problem because we weren't even opening. So how are we spreading the virus?
Although businesses won't be allowed to fully open their doors Monday, one thing that will be in full swing is public schools. Students in grades 7 through 12 will be heading back to classes after several weeks of online learning. We spoke with one grade 10 student who says she's all too happy to be heading back and to be getting away from all of the challenges and distractions of learning at home.
There's Wi-Fi problems, or even there's your other siblings, if you have siblings, like it's difficult because they're also on the Wi-Fi or they're yelling at their computer or like talking, or you can hear like their teachers talking about like their stuff, like their lecture or whatever. I'm actually a bit excited because like I find it easier for me to like learn in class rather than like through like a Zoom call or like Google Meet, or even on my own. Like I can learn on my own, but there's questions I don't like really have to ask somebody. So it's like easier having a physical teacher there and like they can actually show you how to do it or help you. Like I don't mind the mask. Like it's a bit like annoying sometimes, but it's okay.
If you're looking to get rid of your live Christmas tree, the farm at the Lethbridge Corn Maze is accepting drop-offs. Surprisingly, real trees are a natural dewormer for the goats and are quite nutritious for them. Video journalist Micah Quinn has the details.
There are approximately 50 female goats on Theo Slingerland's farm, and he's asking for Lethbridge residents to drop off their live Christmas trees in the farm parking lot for a little snack for the goats.
Christmas trees are, well, usually evergreens, right? So they have needles on them, and in the needles there is something in the needles that will help the goats deworming. So I don't know exactly how it works, but I know it is used in many places. The tree itself, the bark as well, has some nutritional value and also for deworming as well. So in the needles is also a very high amount of vitamin C, and goats are pretty much one of the few animals that will truly eat them. In nature, they will go into a forest, and if you let them run loose, your forest will be gone eventually.
Slingerland says that it's healthy for the goats to eat the trees.
We're looking at probably a tree for every 12 goats a day. They will eat the needles, they will eat the bark, and there's other benefits in there as well, like there's some trace minerals in there, there's some vitamins in there, C and A I believe it is in there. So it's very good for them. And of course it's a nice way of recycling your tree, it doesn't go to waste.
The female goats have been bred for May, and some just a little earlier.
Most of the goats have 2 babies each, so by the summer we should have at least maybe 100 baby goats as well.
The Lethbridge Corn Maze is closed for the winter season, but they're hoping to do goat snuggling when the baby goats arrive. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
Lethbridge police have charged a 33-year-old city man in connection with Tuesday's hit and run, which left a pedestrian in hospital in serious condition. Police say the collision occurred at the corner of 3rd Street and 3rd Avenue South. The driver has been charged with making a false statement, failing to provide accident information, and failing to yield to a pedestrian at a crosswalk. He faces an automatic court appearance on March 16th. One person has died following a collision between a pickup truck and a semi-trailer near Granham. RCMP say the accident occurred Thursday morning around 9:22 a.m. Police say a semi was stopped at an intersection at Highway 2 and Highway 519. When the driver turned northbound, it collided with a pickup truck. 4 people were in the truck at the time, all from the Blood tribe. A 26-year-old male passenger died upon arrival at hospital. The 33-year-old female driver and 29-year-old male passenger, were transported to hospital with non-life-threatening injuries. Another 27-year-old female passenger was airlifted by Stars Air ambulance to another hospital. The driver of the semi was uninjured. The collision remains under investigation. A regimental funeral for the Calgary police officer killed in the line of duty on New Year's Eve will be held tomorrow in the Stampede City. Officials say due to COVID-19 restrictions, only people who have been invited can attend the service for Sergeant Andrew Harnett. The Calgary Police Service was granted an exemption to allow for 50 people to partake in the ceremony. Harnett died on New Year's Eve when he was struck by a vehicle during a traffic stop. 2 people have been charged with first-degree murder in his death. With the current lockdowns in place and many Albertans suffering financially, the last thing we need right now is a tax hike, right? But according to the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, we will be paying higher income taxes this year. To talk about this in more detail is Franco Terrazzano, Alberta Director of the CTF. He joins me now from Calgary. Franco, you say the increase is courtesy of the government's backdoor tax grab known as bracket creep. What exactly is bracket creep?
Is a sneaky backdoor income tax grab. And it happens when the government stops moving the income tax system with inflation. And that can mean that inflation can push taxpayers into higher tax brackets, even though what we can actually afford to buy hasn't increased. Now, there's another issue too, because bracket creep can also erode the tax-free portion of our income. So at the end of the day, what it means is that it's a very sneaky way for the provincial government to be increasing its tax take at the worst possible time.
Wasn't there a promise from Premier Jason Kenney not to hike taxes during an economic downturn?
Premier Jason Kenney and UCP politicians, they've been rightly saying that now is the worst possible time to increase taxes. But higher taxes is exactly what is going on in 2021 because of Premier Jason Kenney's sneaky backdoor income tax hike known as bracket creep. Now, further to that, right, Premier Jason Kenney has no mandate to be increasing taxes. He promised Albertans that he would balance the budget without increasing taxes, and that's the promise that Premier Jason Kenney has to go back to.
Now, in the 2019 budget, government officials said that de-indexing the tax system would cost Albertans $196 million in 2021 this year. By the end of 2022, how much will de-indexing actually cost us?
It's going to cost us about $600 million. So certainly bracket creep, it's a sneaky tax grab, and it's a tax grab that's coming at the worst possible time, right? The last thing that Alberta families need right now is Premier Jason Kenney and their provincial government to reach deeper into our pockets with a tax grab. But higher taxes is exactly what Albertans are going to face unless Premier Jason Kenney removes his sneaky backdoor tax grab known as bracket creep.
That was the Alberta Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, Franco Terrazzano, joining me from Calgary. Premier Jason Kenney has apologized for members of his government and political staff who traveled abroad over the holidays despite COVID-19 health guidelines. Kenney says his government broke public trust and must now rebuild it.
After all of the terrible sacrifices that people have made for 10 months, it was insulting for government leaders to holiday outside of the country. Albertans said they wanted there to be consequences. I heard them, and there have been serious consequences. They were right to make that demand, and that is why those responsible lost jobs and suffered demotions, and we have changed our policies to ensure that elected officials, people in senior positions of public trust, do not travel abroad during this pandemic unless it is for truly essential business reasons. I don't foresee those circumstances. Trust has been broken, and I accept that that trust must be repaired.
Kenney also says because COVID-19 numbers are too high, current lockdown measures will remain in place for the next 2 weeks. As of late Thursday, Alberta had around 13,600 active cases of COVID-19. There have also been just over 1,200 deaths attributed to the virus. Fortunately, close to 95,000 Albertans have also recovered from the virus. Across Canada, close to 545,000 people have also recovered. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says provincial governments looking for more COVID-19 vaccine doses can expect more shipments next week.
That's why we're pleased that we're able to confirm exactly what doses they'll be getting every single week in January, and we're going to be passing along information on the schedule for February and March soon. We need to get it from the companies themselves. It's not the federal government that decides that, and as soon as we get more information from the companies, we will pass that immediately along to provinces so they can plan. We need to make sure we're being as open and transparent and rapid about it so that we can get vaccinations both to the provinces and from the provinces into people's arms as quickly as possible. And on that, we're all working together.
BC's top doctor says COVID-19 restrictions that were set to expire today have been extended until February the 5th. Dr. Bonnie Henry says the curve of the outbreak is up again, and now is not the time to ease those restrictions.
This means that the same requirements that we have had, including restrictions on social gatherings in people's homes, on all events in public venues and private venues, and the restrictions on sports activities, continue to apply. No matter how tired we are, we must stop and rethink and redouble our efforts now.
A Manitoba church minister who was previously fined for defying COVID-19 health orders has been handed yet another ticket. Pastor Tobias Tisson of the Church of God Restoration near Steinbach was cited for speaking at a rally last month. He had previously been handed at least 2 other $1,296 tickets for attending in-person church services and an anti-mask rally in Steinbach. Tisson says he is not discouraged and adds, there are not enough fines out there to stop him from exercising the religious freedoms that God has made available to humanity. The Manitoba government says only 74% of the province's population will be vaccinated against COVID-19 by the end of the year. The figure is in a document titled Manitoba's Immunization Rollout Plan. The projection shows 53% of adults would be immunized with doses by the end of September and 74% by the end of December. The Pallister government says the figures show Ottawa has failed to get enough doses to meet its targets. The Saskatchewan Teachers Federation says it hopes its members will soon be able to receive COVID-19 vaccinations. Healthcare workers, residents and staff in long-term care homes and northern communities are first in line to receive the vaccine. The second phase of the delivery plan is expected to begin in April, when it will continue prioritizing the most vulnerable before providing the vaccine to the general population. Federation President Patrick May says teachers should be considered for priority vaccination during the pandemic. When it comes to COVID-19, there's a big difference between being infected with the virus and getting seriously ill. Now, that's according to award-winning microbiologist Dr. Sucharit Bhakdi.
If you have vaccinated against polio, it doesn't mean that the polio virus can't enter your body and infect you. It means that it can't make you ill. If you are vaccinated against diphtheria, it doesn't mean that the bug can't get into your throat. It does. But the poison that it makes will not kill you. So infection is not to be equated with illness. And all this business about herd immunity is nonsense, absolute nonsense. You have to talk about how many people are going to get seriously ill.
Dr. Bhakdi will also give us his thoughts as to the dangers of the new strains of the coronavirus being discovered. That's coming up later in our program. The province of Quebec will begin a curfew on Saturday to help stem the spread of COVID-19. The province's public safety minister says she expects police to use their judgment while enforcing the new law.
For most of you who respect the sanitary measures, this will not change your lives a lot. But for those who still like to gather with friends, the ball game just became way more difficult. For the next 4 weeks, starting Saturday, anyone will be forbidden to go outside of their homes between 8 p.m. and 5 a.m. Of course, our police officers will act diligently and use their judgment. They will be able to issue fines ranging from $1,000 to $6,000 if a person doesn't respect the curfew.
Minister Gibault says there are exceptions, including people who have to leave for work and leave the house during those hours. It was just over a year ago that a Ukrainian passenger plane was shot down as it was taking off in Iran. Canadian Foreign Affairs Minister Francois-Philippe Champagne recalls the moment he learned of the downing of Flight 752, where all 176 people on board died.
It came in a way personally that no one could have expected, because I was on a call that night and we were assessing whether there was any casualties. If you recall, there were missiles fired in a base where Canadian troops were present, and I was on a call late in the evening to assess the situation, and fortunately there were no civilian casualties and no military casualties. No Canadians were injured. And I recall at that time I was on the phone and I looked at Twitter like I do sometime, and I saw something, a flash news report coming, I think it was the BBC, that said a plane had there was a crash in Tehran, that a plane, at that time we didn't know, I mean the news was just referring to a plane crash in Tehran. And I remember sending a note to one of our colleagues and say, not only we have to deal with that today, but there was also a plane crash, and someone replied to me, there's also an earthquake.
Yeah, that was such a tragic day indeed. Samaritan's Purse has set up an emergency field hospital in North Carolina. It is in response to the rising COVID-19 cases in the region. The 30-bed emergency unit will help support regional medical centers as they reach capacity due to rising coronavirus hospitalizations.
I'm Edward Graham with Samaritan's Purse, and right now I'm standing outside Caldwell Memorial Hospital in Lenore, North Carolina, where Samaritan's Purse is located in Boone, North Carolina. It's about 30 minutes away. Like the rest of the country and the world, COVID-19 has just ravaged the medical healthcare systems, and UNC Health has reached out to Samaritan's Purse about partnering right here and setting up one of our field hospitals, and that's what we're doing. We got incredible volunteers and staff right now setting up this hospital, and we hope to shortly be serving those in this area in the western North Carolina that have been stricken with this virus. So we appreciate your support and your prayers most of all. We ask that you pray specifically for the safety of our staff. We have medical team members that have been fighting this virus all over the world and all over the United States here. But we're just excited to be serving in the name of Jesus Christ with quality health care. Thank you.
And may God continue to bless their work. We had a mainly clear day, but slightly cooler in Lethbridge today. Not a bad weekend, however, shaping up. A complete look at the weather picture is on deck. You know, I look at the calendar, then I look outside and find it very hard to believe that we're this far into January with little to no snow. Jeanette Rocher is here now with all of the weather details. Jeanette, it may be a nice weekend to maybe go for a hike here in southwestern Alberta.
Agreed, yes, lots of sunshine and plus temperatures coming at us this weekend, so it could be a great time to get outside. This evening we'll experience an overnight low of -9 and some fog developing near midnight. Saturday, sunshine and a high of 1 degree. Sunday, +7 and mainly sunny. Monday, another sunny day with 6 degrees. And then we could hit some double digits next week with a high of 11 on Tuesday and 10 on Wednesday. Thursday, a high of 9 degrees with a mix of sun and cloud. Normal highs for this time of year, -2, and normal lows, -14. The highest temperature on this day was 13 degrees back in 1943, and it was -38 in 1989. We'll get a full 8 hours and 23 minutes of sunlight today as the sun rose this morning at 8:27 a.m. Our sunset today at 4:50 p.m. Over on the west coast, looking to tomorrow's highs, a mix of sun and cloud in Victoria, becoming cloudy in the afternoon with a high of 9. Vancouver, mainly sunny, then increasing clouds in the afternoon and high of 7 degrees. Over in Edmonton, mainly sunny, high of -2, but colder with the wind chill. And in Calgary, mainly sunny with a high of -1, with wind chill that could feel more like -6. For both Saskatchewan and Regina, expect mainly sunny skies, high of -6, but colder with that wind chill throughout the day. In Winnipeg, cloudy but clearing in the afternoon, a high of -1. In Toronto, a mix of sun and cloud and a high of 2 is expected tomorrow, and in Ottawa, -3 and a mix of sun and cloud. In Montreal, mainly sunny skies in the morning with a mix of sun and cloud in the afternoon and a high of -1. Over in Atlantic Canada, -1 with a chance of flurries in the morning. Halifax, 1 degree and 30% chance of flurries. 0 degrees over in Charlottetown, up to 2 centimeters of snow is expected and a risk of freezing drizzle. In St. John's, Newfoundland, expect cloudy skies with 60% chance of showers. Wind from the southwest gusting to 60 kilometers per hour and a high of 3 degrees. And there you go. That is your forecast for this Friday. Have a great weekend.
WestJet has announced more layoffs as the airline continues to struggle during the COVID-19 pandemic. The carrier announced today that 1,000 employees would be impacted through a combination of furloughs, temporary layoffs, and reduced hours. There will also be a hiring freeze implemented. The company announced that it will remove 30% of its currently planned February and March capacity from its schedule. That adds up to more than 80% reduction year over year. In addition, the airline plans to reduce 160 domestic flights as travel restrictions negatively impact demand trends. Boeing says it will pay $2.5 billion to settle a U.S. Justice Department investigation. The company will also admit that employees misled regulators about the safety of its 737 MAX aircraft, which suffered 2 deadly crashes shortly after entering airline service. The government and the company said the settlement includes money for the crash victims' families, the airline, and a fine. Prosecutors said Boeing employees gave misleading statements about safety issues with the plane to the Federal Aviation Administration, then covered up their actions. The Canadian economy lost 63,000 jobs last month. Economists are warning that there could be more losses this month amid rising COVID-19 cases. The first job losses reported since last April pushed the unemployment rate up 0.1% to 8.6%. They came as public health restrictions were tightened across the country to try and slow the second wave of the pandemic. Economists say the weak jobs report, along with an appreciation of the loonie, will put pressure on the Bank of Canada to further ease monetary policy. Cineplex says its screen game Time Play is out of time. The country's largest theater chain says it is parting ways with a company that operates the movie trivia app. Time Play let moviegoers test their cinematic knowledge while earning scene points and interacting with advertisements on the big screen. A Cineplex spokesperson says the company was forced to make tough decisions since the pandemic began to stabilize its financial position. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was up 14 points on the day to finish at 18,042. The Dow was up 56 points to 31,097. The S&P 500 was up 20 points to 3824, and the Nasdaq was up 78 points on the day to 12,740. West Texas Intermediate Oil was up $1.82 to $52.65 US per barrel. Natural gas was down 3 cents to $2.70 US. Gold was down $64.94 to $18.49.01 US an ounce, and silver was down $1.72 to $25.42 US an ounce. Wheat is at $277 per metric ton, barley's at $279, canola's at $664, and corn is at $318 per metric ton. Live cattle were down 50 cents to $114.48, feeder cattle were down 75 cents to $136.83, and lean hogs were down 43 cents to $68.70. The Canadian dollar was even over the past 24 hours at 78.81 US. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, Lethbridge has been chosen to host the 2022 Tim Hortons Brier. The 93rd edition of the Canadian Men's Curling Championship will run March 4th through the 13th next year at the Unmasking Centre. Lethbridge is only a handful of Canadian cities to host all 4 major curling events, including the Scottish Tournament of Hearts and the World Men's and Women's Championship. There's an award-winning microbiologist in Germany who says there's a big difference between getting infected with the novel coronavirus and becoming seriously ill. Hear what Dr. Sucharit Bhakti has to say in just a moment. Today's guest joins us from Kiel, Germany. Dr. Sucharit Bhakti is an award-winning microbiologist and co-author of the international bestseller, Corona False Alarm. It's available on Amazon. Dr. Bhakti, welcome to Bridge City News.
Thank you for having me.
And guten Abend, right? You're about 8 hours ahead of us there.
Cool.
Yeah.
Guten Abend.
That's right. Now, first of all, Dr. Bhakti, can you briefly explain how COVID-19 compares with the flu virus? Is COVID-19 much more dangerous than the flu that we've heard?
Well, there has been a paper out by one of the most renowned epidemiologists in the world, John Ioannidis, and he published a full article regarding this question back in October. And the bottom line is this virus is less dangerous than the flu virus for people under 70. And for people who are over 70 or over 80, it is comparable to the flu virus. Point. This is after analysis of all the data that is available in the records of several different countries.
Doctor, we keep hearing that the second wave is resulting in serious increases of COVID deaths and different cases around the world, and the death toll is still rising at an alarming rate in Canada, the United States, and different European nations. Can you explain what these numbers actually tell us?
These numbers are telling you that you are the victims of mass misinformation, because the numbers rely upon a test that is unreliable. This PCR test is not telling the truth. And when you say someone has COVID-19, it just means that this unreliable test has been marked positive. It's like, an alcohol test. You breathe into the tube, and you've drunk 100 mils of vodka, and up goes this column to 1.0, and you're out of your license. Off is the license. But if you drink 1 mil of vodka, then this column goes up to 0.001. And of course, you don't lose your license. With a PCR test, it's different. It's so sensitive that it lights up positive, even if you have only 0.01 alcohol or virus on the swab. And you're not ill. In fact, you're not infected. And the test is therefore telling an untruth. And if you go around testing people, and with a PCR test that is not standardized, where even if the you blow into this tube and you have an alcohol value of 0.01, and you are then put in the list of drunkards, well, it's your own fault. And that's what everyone is doing to the whole world. They're putting people on the list of COVID-19 victims, intensive care units who are not suffering from COVID-19 pneumonia.
Do you feel there are a lot of false positives that are floating around right now?
Oh, masses of them. We don't have any numbers for Germany, but whenever we see the results of the tests, we see that people are being lied to. You see, it's just like these tests that sent people to quarantine, healthy people who just don't realize why they have to go to quarantine. The moment this damn test, which has never been released for diagnostic use, never, is now used to send people 2 hospitals, 2 quarantine, and if you die because this test is not, if you die with a positive test, even if it's a car accident or you jump from the bridge because you're so you've lost everything you've lost, and you have a positive test and the virus has killed you. I mean, I can't understand how people can keep on believing all these lies.
Now, many countries are in lockdown once again around the world. Do you believe that these extreme measures are justified? Are they effective in limiting long-term collateral damage when it comes to the virus?
But of course, it's known that they are not. And first of all, let me say that there have now been 2 excellent papers published that have shown that people without symptoms never have spread COVID-19, the pneumonia, the severe disease, never. And therefore, if you run around masked, although you're doing it because you're being forced to do it, not anything else. And this is a breach of the Constitution. You've lost your freedom nowadays just because these politicians say you have to wear a mask to protect other people, which is a lie. You do it. And by the way, there's just been a very, very good paper out from Denmark because there's this new variant, that you can test for. They decided to find out whether the lockdown and the mask wearing would be effective in preventing this virus to spread. So they took 2 collectives, 2 villages or cities. One had the lockdown and the other didn't, and looked to see if there's any difference in the spread of this harmless virus, and they found that there was no difference at all. The lockdown does nothing.
Now, we now have some new variants, as you mentioned, of COVID-19 from the United Kingdom and from South Africa, Doctor, which many medical experts are quite concerned about. What's your view on the new strains? Are they even more dangerous?
But how can anyone talk about danger if danger has never been cited? I mean, these viruses change all the time. To come by and say there's a new virus around is something that is rather silly. What you have to find out is this virus causing any more damage? And the answer is definitely not. This virus has just been detected. If you go around looking for a new pebble on the beach, you'll find it. But then to get all excited about it is simply very, very foolish, I'm afraid to say. Don't join that club.
Now, can you talk a bit about the new vaccines that have been rushed into production from Moderna, the Pfizer, BioNTech? Do we know if the vaccines are actually safe, or there may be some potential health risks for us down the road?
Well, let me say this. As it is known now that if you are under 70, and you are under 70, your risk of dying of COVID-19 is about 0.05%. Look up this paper by John Ioannidis of Stanford, where it's all documented, okay? Now, if you think that you need to be protected because of 10,000 people who are infected with this virus, 5 may die, then you go and take that vaccine. However, no one in his right mind who is under 70 and is not sort of such a hypochondriac will do that, because these vaccines have never been properly tested. These vaccines have never been shown to be effective in anything. They haven't been shown to prevent the serious disease. And they are dangerous because if you want to introduce a vaccine that is gene-based, you have to think of all the complications that might happen. And in fact, what we said in our book is turning out to be true. These vaccines are very badly tolerated. I mean, the BioNTech vaccine, over 50% of the people who received that vaccine were ill, seriously ill, couldn't go to work for a couple of days. There have been paralyses, Bell's palsy, facial paralyses because the nerves are, don't work. There have been
anaphylactic shocks, which means that you have a severe allergic reaction. Now, since this virus is not causing severe illness in people under 70, why should anyone want to be vaccinated? Of the people who might profit from a really good vaccine, if we want to talk about those, we have to talk about the elderly with pre-existing diseases. But that vaccine has never been tested in such people. Now, they're going around injecting elderly people with pre-existing disease with a vaccine that has not been tested. So all this, the whole world has been turned into an animal farm with humans being experimented upon with a gene-based vaccine. This is something that one day should be placed before a tribunal. It is criminal.
So do we know for seniors then over the age of 70, as you were mentioning, how effective the vaccines will actually be for them?
Of course you can't. It's never been tested. How can you know whether something's going to be effective? There's no way to know. And I can tell you, of course, they will not be effective. How should they be effective? Anyone, we went to great lengths to explain all of this in the book for everyone. So if anyone has read this book, he will understand that this whole vaccination business is a fake. It's an absolute fake. And it's one of the major ways of redistributing wealth. The whole COVID business is a system of wealth redistribution. No one is losing money. If we have friends who are broke now. We have friends who are thinking of committing suicide. They've lost everything. They have not lost their money. The money just has been redistributed. So if you want your money to be redistributed, you go along and do what people are telling you to do. If you don't want to do it, then you stand up and say no.
Now, in your book, Doctor, you write that immunity against the coronavirus doesn't necessarily mean you won't get infected, but rather that you will not become seriously ill. Can you clarify?
Of course. This is what happens to most, in most cases of vaccination. If you have vaccinated against polio, it doesn't mean that the polio virus can't enter your body and infect you. It means that it can't make you ill. If you are vaccinated against diphtheria, it doesn't mean that the bug can't get into your throat. It does. But the poison that it makes will not kill you. So infection is not to be equated with illness. And all this business about herd immunity is nonsense, absolute nonsense. You have to talk about how many people are going to get seriously ill. And if that number is so small as with COVID-19, where 80 to 90% of the infected individuals will not become seriously ill, you don't have a terribly dangerous bug or virus. Point.
Now, the World Health Organization initially discouraged the wearing of masks, saying it was unhealthy, but now, of course, everybody's wearing masks. Why the mixed message? Is it that we learned more about the virus?
The mixed message is because no one stands up and goes to the World Health Organization and say, World Health Organization, are you really a World Health Organization or are you a World Hoax Organization? And if you say you're not a World Hoax Organization, then explain all of this to us immediately. You will never get an answer.
So, Dr. Bhakdi, any final thoughts on where COVID-19 will end up over the next year or two?
That is going to depend on you, not on us. If you continue doing what you're being told to do, like obedient slaves, you are going to end up as a slave.
Thank you so much for your time, Dr. Bhakdi, award-winning microbiologist and co-author of the book Corona False Alarm. Dr. Sukaran Bhakdi, thanks for joining me today from Deutschland.
Thank you for having me. Bye-bye.
The COVID-19 pandemic has had an impact not only on our physical health, but also our finances and our emotional health. One of the spinoffs is an increase in domestic violence, which according to some sources has doubled during lockdown. These instances of intimate partner violence are the result of a number of factors, including stress, tight quarters, and financial trouble. In some countries like the UK, the number of calls to hotlines has increased by as much as 700%. Today's guest is Dr. Greg Jantz, a psychologist who specializes in depression, stress, and anxiety disorders at his world-renowned The Center, a place of hope in Seattle, which is one of the top facilities for treatment of depression in the U.S. Dr. Jantz joins me now via Skype from Edmonds, Washington. Dr. Jantz, welcome back to the show.
Oh, it's good to see you. Good to be here. Yeah, what an important topic we have.
Oh, you're telling me. Now, you say that these statistics should be of no surprise to anyone, and that the COVID restrictions have played a role in the increase that we're seeing in domestic violence. Maybe talk a little bit about that.
Yes, we're seeing an increase in three things. One, anxiety levels everywhere are at an all-time high. That's incredible. And we know that depending on where you live, even medication for anxiety is a little short supply. We also know that depression's at all-time rates. So really, we could say we have an epidemic of anxiety and depression within this pandemic. The numbers are increasing. With that is the increase in suicide and suicide attempts. Now, what we know is confinement, I'm going to say confinement, over a period of time, there's been a lot of chronic stress the last 6 months. We've seen issues such as domestic violence, abuse, emotional abuse. This is not talked about as much, but what we're seeing is it's way up as well, and we need to talk about it.
Yeah, now even before the pandemic, the rate of depression was on the rise, right? But you believe that there's a link between domestic violence and how people learn to cope under stress, right? Particularly in these times.
That's right. The stress has been chronic for over 6 months, and that chronic stress has been layered with a number of, well, uncertainties. There's been certain unrest. There's been, I call it a pandemic purgatory. People are not happy where they are. They can't go back, don't want to go back. And looking ahead, there's so many unknowns. And so anytime we have, if you will, confinement, isolation, restrictions, really oppression, we see an increase in addiction. So depending on where one lives, what we know is alcohol sales are certainly way up. Now, in certain areas, alcohol sales are up 500 to 600%. So I did a little personal experiment. I asked the checkout at a grocery store. I just said, hey, I leaned over the plexiglass. I said, what's your number one seller right now? And she said to me, it's alcohol. We can't even keep it on the shelves.
Wow.
So anytime we have alcohol sales up high, we're going to actually see an increase in abuse, emotional abuse, physical abuse. So anything related to abuse also goes up when there's addiction.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I know that you counsel a lot of victims of abuse, but I would imagine you counsel also people who are using violence or abuse as a coping mechanism. So what do you tell these people? How do you turn them away from inflicting abuse and turn them towards the right coping mechanisms? And what is the right coping mechanism under the circumstances we're in right now? I know it's a loaded question.
Oh, sure it is. Well, I'll do my best. One of the things that we know, and thank you for asking, is that underlying issues need to be dealt with. So we serve folks who come in from all over, and they're here at our facility for a period of time. So we need to treat some of the underlying faulty coping mechanisms. Sometimes there's trauma. A lot of what we're seeing, though, is we're treating that underlying addiction that's been secret really for so long. And as we begin to address some of those issues, it's a lot easier to get at the core of, well, what makes a person an abuser? Where does that come from? And, so often it is a person who has had some trauma in their past. And so we do look at that. We know that abuse, emotional abuse, is all about power and control, how we're going to control another person. Generally, Jeanette, people do that because they feel afraid or they feel like they're losing control. So I'm going to try to increase control.
Makes sense, right? Especially in today, what's happening today when life is so out of control. They need to feel a sense of control.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, you've authored a book called Unmasking Emotional Abuse, and it's available at aplaceofhope.com. So, Dr. Jantz, can you give us just a brief snapshot of what your book focuses on?
Well, we hear things about sexual abuse. We hear things about physical and domestic violence. But one area we don't hear about is emotional abuse. It's the person that maybe they control you through words or through threats, or a threat of a threat. And it's the person that has a lot of power in your life, and maybe they're give you that look, and it's a threat. So it comes in various forms. So when I say unmasking, a lot of times we need to look at, well, what are the different forms that emotional abuse can be? Sometimes we think of just name calling, and it's so much more than that. So we need to have our eyes opened to what is emotional abuse, and then we can move on to, okay, now what do I do?
Can you maybe give us an example of what emotional abuse looks like, or maybe what the definition of it is?
Sure. Emotional abuse, if I was just to define it, it'd be to be treated unfairly and unjustly over a period of time. Now, it's not a one-time event. We all make mistakes. We might explode and we say something we regret. The healthy response is to say, wow, I am so sorry. And would you please forgive me? That's a healthy response. But the emotional abuser just keeps doing those things without any remorse. So one form, I was just talking to somebody the other day, and she said, one of the things that my father said to me over and over and over growing up is, why can't you be more like your sister? Look at her. And there was constant comparison. And that was a message. The message is, you're not good enough. Look at how great your sister is. You're not good enough. And so that message over time ends up having an effect of really being emotionally abusive, because it's undermining your self-worth, your self-esteem, and it's cunning, but over time it does teach you that something must be wrong with me.
Wow. Do you think that emotional abusers realize what they're doing, and do they realize that it's hurting the victim?
There's two types, if I put two general camps. There's an emotional abuser that they're just kind of being that way because that's how they were treated. They learned it well, and so they've just continued that pattern. And with proper intervention and help, they can really learn to change that. And maybe they don't even realize how destructive they are. Then the other emotional abuser, they know, and their goal is to create harm. Their goal is to create destruction and to control you. Their intent is harm, and so they know what they're doing.
That's scary. Now, in your book, you say that physical and sexual abuse are always accompanied by emotional abuse. Can you explain this?
Yes. Well, what we know is if you're ever a victim of sexual abuse, you have been emotionally controlled. If you've been a victim of physical abuse and you've been hit, there's a lot of emotional abuse that's packed into that. But what we don't usually look at is that emotional abuse can stand alone. Maybe you were never physically abused, maybe you were never sexually abused, but you grew up in that environment of name calling, that environment of comparisons, that environment of put downs, and over time that was fairly abusive. So emotional abuse can stand alone. Sometimes we make excuses for it. For example, we go, "Oh, that's just the way he or she is. That's just the way they are," and you kind of learn to live with it, and we deny how destructive it really is.
Now, how can we uncover and confront emotional abuse?
Well, we're going to uncover it by really opening our eyes to it. That's why in the small book, Unmasking Emotional Abuse, I actually outline here's some things to look for, um, and then there's a few strategies that can be helpful depending on the emotional abuser. There's times where we have to actually physically separate. It's so bad that we need to separate ourselves out away from that emotional abuse. Part of it is so we can regroup and have a plan, but also the message is this is no longer okay. And it's so easy to fall into that victim role where I'm just a victim, I allow it, and I make excuses for it. So my book is about how to empower you because you're no longer going to be the victim. Sometimes we need help. Sometimes we need somebody to stand alongside us, tell us the truth. Times we need an emotional protection, a shield of protection from all those fiery darts.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, is it possible that some people see abuse when there really isn't any?
Well, I think we can develop this hypervigilance. It's like I'm so sensitive. And if I have a lot of hurt and resentment in my life, I might misread things from people. I'm hypersensitive. And so you can take on offenses quite easily and where there was nothing ever intended. So it's the person that has been so hurt and traumatized and so full of resentment that they easily pick up an offense. It's like you can't say anything right to them. They misinterpret, and so that's where unforgiveness can take you.
Right. And it's possible that that person needs to work through some healing as well, because it sounds like
Yes,
they've been a victim in the past as well, and they're
that's
kind of
right.
carrying that into their present.
Yes.
Okay, so what are some of the impacts on an individual who is emotionally abused? And I think you just touched on one of them for sure.
Well, one effect will be they will suffer from depression. I'm living in a depressed state, so they will live in depression. The other, simply put, is they're going to live with a lot of anxiety. They're going to struggle with closeness or intimacy in relationships, not knowing who to trust or how to trust. They may feel like they're always disconnected from other people, disconnected from God. So there's a disconnect in their life. We call it attachment, where they really are having a hard time attaching.
Wow. Now, at the end of your book, you include steps to healing. So, what are some of these?
Well, I've hinted a little bit. Ultimately, there's got to be a place of forgiveness. That can seem so overwhelming. I have to move. Number one, I'm no longer going to be a victim, and I can't carry the poison of hurt and resentment in my life anymore. Yes, I was mistreated. Yes, I was abused. But I have to make a decision that I'm going to unload that toxic emotion, resentment, bitterness. And sometimes I really need some help on doing that. It's not always an instant just happens. It's an ongoing decision. And I think sometimes forgiveness and what needs to happen is so deep that it really requires allowing God to help us.
Right. So, what does forgiveness look like to the person who has been abused?
Well, it looks like I'm no longer going to live a life of blame. What you did to me was wrong, but I am not going to live in that bondage. I am going to be who God called me to be. I'm going to live my life with good and healthy relationships. And I have a personal mission and calling that I'm going to live out. So it changes a whole trajectory of one's life.
Yeah, so it looks like freedom is what it
Yeah,
looks like,
absolutely.
right? Yeah. Okay, and for somebody who is on the other side of that, the abuser, what are some coping mechanisms that they can dive into so that they stop doing that? I mean, besides counseling, of course, which is
Sure.
very
Well, I think
important.
there does have to be accountability. There has to be, such a deep desire, not only to change, but to understand that your words and actions have been damaging. And so, really, it's a development of a new empathy. I really need to have an empathy and a compassion for those who I've hurt. And that means taking responsibility. That means understanding it may be a long time before they really trust me. I need to prove myself in a whole new way. My point of focus can't be on other people. My point of focus has to be on really redemption and allowing God to work in my life and have accountability and to create change.
Thanks so much, Dr. Jans. Greg Jans is the author of Unmasking Emotional Abuse, available at aplaceofhope.com. Thanks so much for being with us today.
Good to be with you.
I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at BCN. Thanks for watching.